Even for non-believers, Jesus is omnipresent in Western culture. For more than 2 billion Christians, he's the Son of God, sacrificed on the cross, the resurrected Messiah.
For Christians, Jesus brings salvation to humanity.
Marking the starting point in the Gregorian calendar, he is the cornerstone of Christianity, a figure whose history has evolved over 2,000 years in accordance with the creed of the churches.
Jesus was a charismatic man whose disciples were inspired enough by his message to turn it into a religion.
For a long time, it was dangerous to ask too many questions about Jesus, because that would have meant doubting him.
Not until the 18th century and the Enlightenment was the question of historical Jesus really explored. Beyond the religious discourse, who was Jesus really? Did he actually exist? Was he born on December 25th, as tradition has it?
The so-called quest for the historical Jesus is a somewhat endless question.
People have been just fascinated with the question, so it is fascinating.
Believers turn to the Gospels, the ancient accounts of the life of Jesus, looking for answers.
The Gospels feed Western culture. In literature, the arts, cathedrals, painting, sculpture, they're hugely important.
But what historical credence can we give to these texts written decades after the death of Jesus? Can we trust what they say about his existence?
Whenever we compare the Gospels in the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they don't all say the same thing.
These are rival texts. They're in competition with one another.
Should we then question the authenticity of the holy sites in Israel as described in these accounts? Where was Jesus born? Where can we find his tomb?
Some people every year are going to the Basilica of the Nativity and the Church of the Empty Tomb, but there is no evidence identifying any of these sites with what's in the Gospels.
Could other sites recently discovered by archaeologists take their place? Can they advance our knowledge of the life of Jesus?
So the tomb is, of course, very important because we've got the immediate family of Jesus in one tomb.
It's obvious that in the first century, like every Jew of the time, Jesus walked down these steps.
Today, by examining the historical traces in Israel, Egypt, and Jordan, and by applying cutting-edge science, can historians finally manage to penetrate the mystery of Jesus' life? Beyond the tenets of the Christian faith, believers, non-believers, and historians grapple with the same 2,000-year-old conundrum. Did Jesus really exist? For almost half of humanity, the existence of Jesus is not in doubt. He is at the heart of the Christian message. His existence is also acknowledged by Islam. He is the central figure of the 4 Gospels officially recognized by the Catholic Church, collected in the New Testament. The Gospels according to Mark, Matthew, John, and Luke. Jesus is a paradox. He is one of the most famous figures in the world. He has been represented, drawn, sculpted, and painted countless times. The Bible is the most widely distributed and translated book in the world, and yet we know very little about him. What's more, for many centuries in Western Europe, the question did not even arise. The creed of the Church was the absolute truth.
For a long time, it was dangerous to ask too many questions about Jesus and demand proof of his historical existence. To do so would be to doubt him, and in a country where Christianity was the religion imposed on all, such questions were regarded as wicked.
Not until the 18th century and the emergence of a degree of critical thinking was the matter of the historical existence of Jesus finally debated. That is to say, did the man at the origin of the Christian message, the one described in the Gospels, truly exist? And for the first defenders of the Christ myth theory, the answer was no.
According to the Christ myth theory, Jesus Christ did not exist. He's merely a myth.
And their argument is that the patterns of divinity, of God in heaven, coming down to earth, being born of a virgin, that this is a mythological typology that we know in mystery religions and other Greco-Roman religions.
A guy walks on water, he changes water into wine, he heals anybody that comes to him, and crowds do, that seem to be more like comic book superheroes than historical figures.
One of the first arguments put forward by Christ myth proponents is the lack of direct testimonies of Jesus' life written during his lifetime.
Doesn't this merit some kind of coverage or mention by contemporary sources?
Progress in historical research, complemented by the emergence of archaeology in the 19th century, highlighted two important factors. The first copies of the Gospels that we have date from the 4th century. 200 years ago, in the monastery of St. Catherine in Egypt, one of the oldest surviving Christian manuscripts, the ancestor of the Bible, was discovered by chance, the Codex Sinaiticus.
These are original leaves of the Codex Sinaiticus from the early 4th century. It was written in Greek within the lifetime of the Emperor Constantine himself. The Codex Sinaiticus has been called the world's oldest Bible. This is a manuscript of the very greatest importance for people who make a study of the scriptures.
Copied and assembled by scribes in a great Greco-Roman city in Alexandria, Rome, or Caesarea, these Gospels form the official message adopted by the Church. They are called the canonical Gospels.
There are 4 Gospels. Unfortunately, we do not have the manuscripts written by the apostles themselves. We want to get as close as possible to the text that they wrote, and that is the significance of the Codex Sinaiticus.
However, according to some historians, the choice of the 4 Gospels recognized by the Church is arbitrary, because they are not the only ones. There are about 60 others, unofficial Gospels known as Apocrypha.
The apocryphal Gospels, the ones rejected from the church canon, are later texts from a period between the 2nd and 4th centuries that typically come from Christian sources but have a hint of the fantastical.
There's a Gospel of Peter, there's a Gospel of James, there's a Gospel of Thomas. Has some very important information that's not in the canonical Gospels.
It's fascinating to compare them. You realize that, in fact, there is little agreement to be found between the individual texts. We can deduce likelihoods or presume areas of probability, but very little can be stated with any degree of certainty.
In addition to the religious accounts, a rare third source exists, which is the Latin historians of antiquity, such as Tacitus, Suetonius, and most importantly, Flavius Joseph.
One of our earliest sources for referencing Jesus outside the Gospels is the Jewish historian Josephus. He was born in the year 37, so that's 7 years after Jesus' death.
Flavius Joseph is a Jewish historiographer who was Romanized. In his writings, addressed to a Roman population, he tells us that Jesus was put on the cross by Pontius Pilate under the Principate of Tiberius.
As with copies of the Gospels, clearly historians are faced with the issue of the surviving Flavius texts actually being copies made by Christians, who may have taken the opportunity to strengthen the messianic dimension of Jesus.
The reference to Jesus, it seems like it's been either totally forged or partially forged. For example, it starts out, "At that time there appeared a man," no problem with that. And then it adds, "if it's lawful to be calling him a man." Well, that sounds like a Christian maybe Remember, the copies of Josephus were preserved by Christians in the Middle Ages and passed down. We don't have ancient copies of Josephus from the 1st and 2nd century, so whether that's a strong source or not is questionable.
Throughout the 20th century, proponents of the Christ myth theory diminished in number. The lack of texts directly testifying to Jesus is simple to explain. In a culture where very few people knew how to write, information was passed by word of mouth. What's more, a thorough analysis of the Gospels dates the writing of the text to the period between 65 and 110 AD.
When you open up the New Testament, you immediately come to Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're all from the 1st century, we think. So that would be during the first 70 years from the time of Jesus' death. Historians, however, almost universally doubt that these names were original.
The Gospels, then, are a collection of oral accounts written relatively soon after the death of Jesus. The very fact of putting these accounts down on paper shows the importance of this new religion. Their purpose was to spread the good word. They were tools to convert people to the Christian faith and should in no way be regarded as historical accounts or biographies. Investigating the life of Jesus is a complex operation.
The Gospels are theological treatises. They're theological presentations. They're almost like sermons, and they're written to cause you to believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, that he's been raised from the dead, and so forth. They don't have the modern standards, and even modern history. You got to take them all and see then what we can sort out, and that's the job of historians.
We must therefore study all that science tells us about historical Jesus and everything that we know about his life, starting with his birth. Was he really born on December 25th, on the eve of year one? Are we now in 2023? These questions seem obvious. However, every year, the birth of Jesus is celebrated at Christmas, an event held dear by the Catholic Church.
In the Christian tradition, the Nativity is the coming of the Son of God. And so it's a major event, fundamental to the history of humanity.
Whenever we think about the birth of Jesus, the Christmas story, most people have in their heads famous paintings of the manger. Jesus is in a little crib. There's usually cows and animals around. Mary looking adoringly at Jesus and Joseph.
When we study the Gospels, the date of December 25th is never mentioned. Even more surprisingly, references to the event differ and even contradict one another.
Neither Mark nor John talks about the birth of Jesus. The two texts known as the Gospels of the childhood are Matthew and Luke. Matthew describes a star that the Magi follow and also tells us that Jesus was born under the reign of Herod the Great. Luke, meanwhile, talks about a census carried out by a Syrian legate called Quirinius, and also the presence of shepherds and sheep in the fields.
What can we deduce from this information? The presence of sheep and shepherds, for example, is surprising in midwinter, even in the mild climate of the Near East. Spring or late summer pasture would seem a more likely period. So why commemorate the date of December 25th?
There's a 1 in 365 chance that Jesus was born on December the 25th. It's well known that December the 25th is the date of the winter solstice. So Christianity has been very good at appropriating days that were once celebrated in great pagan rites.
What people don't realize, that date has been celebrated long before Jesus. It's the Saturnalia. This has nothing to do with Jesus. This was celebrated universally by the Romans and the Greeks. We don't have December 25th as the date until 200 or 300 years after the time of Jesus, when that festival is so popular in the Roman culture and in the pagan culture of the time.
According to this thesis, Jesus most probably was not born on December 25th. Not until the year 354, some 4 centuries later, does the date appear for the first time. Constantine, the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity, reshaped the calendar to base it on the birth of Christ. He commandeered a major pagan holiday, the better to introduce Christianity into people's practices. While the choice of the day of Jesus' birth may have been opportunistic, can the year be deduced from the Gospels? In the Christian calendar, the years are counted from the birth of Jesus, which should have been the virtual year 0. But what do the Gospels say? Matthew speaks of a birth under Herod the Great.
Matthew talks about Herod the Great, who we know died most probably in the year 4 BC. Some say 2 BC, but certainly not in the year 1 AD.
Except that in Luke, this isn't the date used as a starting point. Rather, the census of Quirinus, which can be dated to what we would now call 6 AD.
We're told both that Jesus died under Herod the Great and at the same time of the census, so no date fits.
If Jesus was born during the reign of King Herod, that was more than 4 years before the official date. If he was born during the census of the Roman prefect, then it is more than 6 years later. To pinpoint the year, scientists looked at another piece of information mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, the appearance of the Star of Bethlehem.
The Star of Bethlehem, or the Star of David, appears in the sky and leads the Magi to find and worship Jesus. It's a prophetic proclamation.
Did an extraordinary celestial event really take place in the skies above Bethlehem 2,000 years ago to guide the Magi from the east? According to scientists, the appearance of this mysterious star could well have an explanation.
In the Gospel of St. Matthew, there's a mention of a star appearing above Bethlehem, describing something very bright. This leads to numerous hypotheses involving exploding stars, novas, supernovas, stars at the end of their life, or even cornet transits. Above all, there's a possibility of a planetary conjunction, which in this case would be between Jupiter and Saturn. Those two would have been observed very close to each other at that time.
Thanks to modern computers, astronomers can produce a detailed reconstruction of the celestial configuration at any given moment over a period of several thousand years. In the sky over Bethlehem on the evening of December 24, 2021, the planet Jupiter is clearly visible to the naked eye. If we go back in time to December of the virtual year 0, nothing special appears. But what happened later? In the year 7 BC, Saturn and Jupiter came close together as they entered the constellation of Pisces, before being eclipsed and then revealed by the Moon. Seen from the Earth, the apparent proximity of the two planets makes them seem as bright as a star, despite being 400 million miles apart. Could the Star of Bethlehem, seen by the Magi, be the result of this conjunction?
This conjunction of two major planets would occur 3 times in a 9-month scale. That's what made them think a very important figure was about to be born. It also occurred in the constellation of Pisces, which in the astrological tradition was the element of water and therefore of nativity.
This phenomenon was rare and significant enough to find its place in the Gospels. But at the time of establishing the calendar under Constantine, there must have been an error in the calculations.
If there is some believability and historical validity to this conjunction of the planets in April of 7 BC, then our calendar is off by about 8 years. Guess what? I don't think anybody's going to go back and change it.
In this hypothesis, we are currently in the year 2030, not 2023. Another mystery is the exact location of Jesus' birth. Since the 4th century, Christians have celebrated the birth of Jesus in one of the oldest churches in the world, the Basilica of the Nativity in Bethlehem, a few miles south of Jerusalem.
The Basilica of the Nativity is obviously a very important location in the Christian faith. being on the historic site of the coming of Jesus, so the Nativity is very important.
Christian tradition attributes the construction of the Basilica of the Nativity to Constantine and Helena. It is believed to have been built sometime before 333 AD, since we have an account from that year written by a Bordeaux pilgrim who'd visited the holy sites.
One of the things we try to do when we do the historical Jesus is find out about the archaeology. What evidence is there? Helena, the mother of the emperor, Constantine, has become a very devout Christian. She only has the Bible to go by, the New Testament. So she goes to Bethlehem and she asks around. So she's probably talking to some of the indigenous people that lived in the country. She did identify this cave. Maybe somebody showed her. Maybe there was a legend or a tradition. Like, I think it was over here. Oh, well, we'll build a church here.
Beneath the basilica's chancel, in the crypt, a 14-pointed silver star inlaid in the marble floor indicates the precise spot where the event apparently occurred. It bears the inscription, "Here Jesus Christ was born of the Virgin Mary." In front of it, according to tradition, the Magi deposited their offerings of gold, frankincense, and myrrh.
From an archaeological point of view, there's nothing to prevent it from being the cave of the Nativity. The site was authenticated by Christian oral tradition, which is why Constantine, when he authorized the Christian religion, had a church built there.
There is nothing to prevent it from being the cave of the Nativity, yet there is no mention of such a grotto in the Gospels. According to John, Jesus was born in a stable, while Luke mentions a house. Once again, the accounts do not concur.
You have to realize that this was a cave at the bottom of a house, and that houses were very often semi-troglodyte. The Gospel says that the living room was full, so a quiet place had to be found, which was the cave lower down where the animals were.
Was this cave the birthplace of Jesus? No archaeological evidence prior to the 4th century has emerged to confirm it. In fact, some historians doubt that Jesus was even born in Bethlehem. Again, several theories have been advanced. Was Jesus born elsewhere? To answer this question, the birth of Jesus must be put in its historical context. At that time, the Roman Empire was at its zenith. It had occupied the whole of the Mediterranean and Judea for more than 60 years.
In 63 BC, when General Pompey captured Jerusalem, the Roman Senate decided to install a king, an ally of Rome, who was none other than Herod the Great.
He was a great builder who rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. This is the admirable side of the character because, in reality, he was a dangerous paranoiac, a dictator who massacred his own family and instigated a reign of terror. So hopes were high for a liberator, a Messiah, a descendant of David who could drive out the Romans and liberate Israel.
To make Jesus a credible Messiah, he had to be in the lineage of David, the second king of the Jews, then a key figure in the Bible. David was born in Bethlehem, so the Gospels of Matthew and Luke place Jesus' birth in the city without concurring. In the first, Joseph and Mary lived in Bethlehem. Then once Jesus was born, they moved to Nazareth. In Luke's version, Jesus' parents lived in Nazareth. They traveled to Bethlehem, Joseph's hometown, when Mary was pregnant to take part in the census ordered by the prefect Quirinius. The date of the census, though, does not match up. It took place in the year 6 AD, after the birth of Jesus.
It's important that Jesus was born in Bethlehem to establish his Davidic credentials, his messianic mission. If he's heir of King David, he may be the Messiah.
Perhaps Luke was aware of a census without knowing its precise date, and took advantage of it to justify Jesus' birth in Bethlehem.
Another hypothesis put forward by historians places Jesus' birth in Nazareth, where, according to religious texts, Jesus grew up.
The city of Nazareth is very important. Jesus belongs to a Davidic clan that settled in Nazareth, from the word Nezer, meaning offspring of David. So within this small group, even if they're only peasants or craftsmen, there's an obvious correlation between the notion of Nazareth, Nazarene, and Davidic ancestry.
But this ancient city long remained a mystery for archaeologists, who could find no trace of it, and its existence is not mentioned in the Gospels.
It has been argued that Nazareth did not exist because there is no mention of it in any Old Testament text.
Whenever we think about Nazareth, Jesus from Nazareth, the question is, does the city exist? Because over the centuries, critical scholars have wondered, maybe that's just mythology, it's made up.
But today, in the north of Israel, near the Basilica of the Annunciation in Nazareth, archaeologists have unearthed the remains of an ancient village with a population of something like 50 to 100 inhabitants at the time of Jesus. Beneath the convent of the Sisters of Nazareth, a first-century house is particularly well preserved. Did it belong to Mary and Joseph, Jesus' parents?
It is my firm belief that Jesus lived in Nazareth. And the discovery of these remains gives us another sense of what might have happened in Nazareth, providing a spiritual and a Christian dimension. The fact that it was rebuilt after some destruction suggests that this small house was important enough to not be razed to the ground.
Near the house, a tomb from the same period was also discovered. It is proclaimed by some Christians to be that of Saint Joseph.
There is a tomb called the Tomb of the Just Man, which is a millstone tomb and therefore associated with royalty. Why in a small village is there a royal tomb?
Here too, we are told that in the area, only 8 such examples of this type of first-century Herod-era tomb exist.
Are this tomb and the dwelling connected to the family of Jesus? After 14 years of researching the site, this is the theory put forward by Professor Ken Dark from the UK's University of Reading. But what evidence could validate it scientifically? What is known for sure is that the site was transformed into a place of worship as early as the 2nd century to accommodate the earliest Christians. Whether or not Jesus was born in Nazareth, the Gospels agree that it was in this rural village that he spent his childhood, a childhood shrouded in mystery. According to the New Testament, Jesus was raised by his mother Mary and his father Joseph, alongside 2 sisters whose names are unknown, and 4 brothers, James, Jose, Simon, and Jude.
The childhood of Jesus in the Gospels is mainly from the Gospel according to Luke, which has Jesus as an avid reader of the Bible. But the evangelists can't have known that. These are really constructions to dress up a character. There's nothing very solid in their accounts.
The Gospels are not biographies. Otherwise, there wouldn't be so many gaps in Jesus' childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood, for example.
So what did Jesus do between the ages of 7 and 30? Where did he travel? Who did he meet? Can the study of texts, archaeology, and science shed any light on this mystery?
All kinds of legends have arisen. Some people say he went to India and studied with the Buddhists. Others have him going to Egypt and learning secrets of Egyptian mythology.
According to the Gospel of Luke, at the age of 12, Jesus went to Jerusalem with his parents to celebrate Passover. Within the walls of the old city, built on the hill where the Omar Mosque stands today, was Herod's temple.
The temple was a high place of worship of Israel, a place you had to make a pilgrimage to several times a year. It's an extremely important site for Jews, and as a Jew, Jesus fully adhered to the presence of God in the Holy of Holies.
We only have one story in the Gospels. When Jesus is 12 years old, and they find him sitting in the temple talking to the rabbis and the doctors of the law of the Torah, and they're amazed at his wisdom.
Destroyed in 70 AD and never rebuilt, what remains of the temple today are the stones of the Western Wall, in front of which the Jews still gather to pray, as well as the two staircases. It is historically probable that Jesus went there, as well as being interesting for its messianic status.
It's obvious that in the first century, like any Jew of the time, Jesus walked down these steps. He went to the temple to discuss with the doctors and sages of the time and to prepare his religious majority.
Jesus on the steps of the Temple of Jerusalem underscores his destiny as interpreter of the Bible, of the Torah, and that he is an observant Jew. Jesus was very much part of the Judaism of his time.
It's difficult to imagine 2,000 years later what a Jew like Jesus might have seen when he arrived in Jerusalem. But thanks to modern technology, the temple can now be modeled. And this is what it looked like. It was a vast construction with a massive extension started by Herod the Great in 19 BC. The esplanade alone was spread over more than 14 hectares.
Herod's temple was a monumental construction that has no equivalent in antiquity. You can imagine the people of the time catching their first glimpse of the monument with its Holy of Holies, 200 feet high, with white stones and gilding all around. The temple was so imposing that it could be seen from a very long way away. So, for a young man coming here for the first time, it must have been very impressive.
Would this apparition have strengthened Jesus' spiritual awareness? After the age of 12, all trace of him is lost until his public appearances 18 years later. From the time Jesus began to preach when he was 30 years old, his life is better documented. What do the Gospels tell us? In the texts, he settles in Capernaum on the northwestern shore of Lake Tiberias.
Capernaum was a fishing village with no ramparts or any means of defense. A small village of some 500 or 600 inhabitants with a jetty extending into the lake.
Capernaum is like Cape Canaveral for the space exploration. This is Jesus' home base. From here, he's going out and always coming back. He's living with Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip. These are 5 fishermen, and you have others as well, obviously.
This is where Jesus formed his group of 12 apostles.
Why does he move here? Well, this is the Via Maris. This is the traffic route. You know, you go from Caesarea Maritima, the big Mediterranean port, which Herod the Great built, to Damascus. This is the road. And from Damascus, you go to Mesopotamia. And you go from Caesarea to Alexandria, and you have Egypt and the Nile and Africa. So it's a place of communication, of meeting traders, different people. So it's a great place for spreading the message.
What remains of Capernaum, the ancient city where so much happened that the name has now become a part of everyday language? Is it possible to find evidence of the presence of Jesus as described in the Gospels? Below this modern church in the shape of a flying saucer are the remains of 3 churches built successively over the centuries. A 5th century octagonal church from the Byzantine era, a small square church that is older, and finally, a house that stands out from all the others found in Capernaum.
Under the present church, we have the remains of Peter's house. The walls were completely plastered in the second half of the 1st century. That means 15, 20 years after Jesus. So this is very unique. There are no private domestic utensils that you would find in all the other houses. And there are lots of lamps, and there are large vessels. So what was going on in this place? This had changed its function. Why? Then there's the big debate about the graffiti with the name of Peter. So why are they writing this there? Then we have the further development that goes on generation to generation.
For Christians, there's no doubt. This is the house where Jesus and his disciples lived. Although science cannot confirm the hypothesis, it is possible to faithfully reconstruct the house as it was in the first century, at the time of Jesus.
This is the same place Jesus was seeing. So this is a great value for connecting with those original events that generated our faith.
Just across the street from the house are other remains, whose discovery could prove crucial in the search for the historical Jesus. Namely, the ancient synagogue of Capernaum.
The Gospels frequently refer to this synagogue. Here, Jesus freed the demoniac. Here, Jesus healed the man with the crippled hand. Here, Jesus gave the Eucharistic discourse in John chapter 6. This synagogue is the core teaching place in Capernaum, and Capernaum is the core teaching place in the Gospel story. This is a treasure.
Whether the synagogue or the house of Peter, the concordance of the remains with biblical accounts is striking.
All these locations, all the research points towards the existence in the first century of our era of a character called Jesus, unquestionably.
Surrounded by his disciples, Jesus' message spread throughout Galilee. Just 16 miles west of Capernaum was the small village of Cana, where the first of the 7 miracles reported by the apostles is said to have been performed.
During a wedding in Cana, Mary tells Jesus that the guests have no more wine. Yielding to her request, Jesus asked the servants to fill the stone jars with water. And the miracle was accomplished, so that whenever water was drawn, it was actually exquisite wine.
Today, Cana is called Kafir Cana. At the supposed site of the miracle stands a small Franciscan church. Every year, thousands of pilgrims from all over the world flock to it to celebrate the legendary wedding feast and worship Peter's stone jar.
This is a vase that was founded here in this area. If you see in the top, there is a small channel, so it means maybe it was for oil or was for wine or grains. So we are talking here about the remains of the first century. So it's from Jesus' time. But for this miracle, the disciples start believing in Jesus. So it was a signal for his disciples.
While the fervor of the devout is sincere, some historians explain this miracle by recalling how wine was made at the time. The unfiltered grape must have left a thick deposit in the bottom of jars. When diluted with water, the mixture took on the color and taste of wine and became drinkable again.
Jesus' miracles shouldn't always be examined empirically. We must also look at their meaning and significance in the context of biblical tradition.
This transformation of water into wine was not just some redundant miracle. It has a deep theological meaning. It announces his public ministry and says that the grace of God is overflowing. It foretells the heavenly banquet.
This miracle of the transformation of water into wine, presented in the Gospel according to John, is the first of the signs given by Jesus for the benefit of his disciples.
Many miracles were performed by Jesus according to the Gospels. There was the feeding of the multitude, the healing of a paralytic, the healing of several blind people.
One of these supernatural healings is said to have taken place somewhere in Jerusalem.
The healing of the blind man took place at the Siloam pool. The blind man received saliva, then mud on his eyes from Jesus, and was told, "Go and wash yourself in the Siloam pool. You are healed." We see that John was an eyewitness. He lived in Jerusalem, he knew the place very well, and he describes the pool frequented by pilgrims. All the details ring true.
sont criants de vérité.
According to the Gospel, Siloam Pool was an expanse of water where 2,000 years ago, pilgrims flocked to purify themselves before going to pray at the temple. For a long time, historians could find no trace of the site and doubted its existence. Some claimed the event must have taken place along the canal carrying the water into the city. But its construction postdates the life of Jesus. Then, in 2004, below the Temple of Jerusalem, archaeologists made an extraordinary discovery.
We're sitting in Siloam Pool, in the southern side of City of David. It was found occasionally in a small miracle. What we see over here is only the northern side of this pool. We know from excavations done that it's continued around 50 meters to the east, which means that it was a very, very large pool. It goes together very well with the literary sources in the Gospel mentioned Jesus coming over here from the Galilee as a pilgrimage to Jerusalem.
The discovery of Siloam Pool in Jerusalem is one of the most important discoveries of the last 2 decades. When archaeology overlaps with the texts in the Gospels, the historical character of Jesus is reinforced. Also in Jerusalem, just a few hundred meters away, is where the final hours of Jesus' earthly existence unfolded. For 2 millennia, one place in particular has been the subject of much discussion, the site of the crucifixion and his tomb. Once again, there's a clash of hypotheses. As with the Nativity, the official site of Jesus' death was determined during the reign of Constantine by the Empress Helena in the 4th century, where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was later built.
The Holy Sepulchre has been an important site for Christianity from the very beginning, capturing all the mystery of faith epitomized by the death and resurrection of Jesus.
According to the Church, after being anointed with spices and wrapped in a shroud, Jesus' body was placed in this tomb. 2 days later, on Easter Day, he was resurrected.
Every year, many pilgrims come here as a way to show their faith and to give thanks to Jesus.
But how can we be sure that the body of Jesus was actually placed there? On this question, science has long been powerless.
A stone is very difficult to date because carbon-14 dating cannot be used. Examining the way it is cut and the style is one way of putting a date to it.
Not until October 2016, during extensive restoration work on the Edicule, was the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre reopened for the first time in 200 years. Scientific analysis of materials and structures state categorically that it is impossible to date any of the remains further back than 1,700 years.
In Jerusalem, no other place corresponds better to what the Gospels tell us than here. So while that's not proof, it does lend authenticity to the claim.
We now know that the foundations date from the 4th century. So with regard to its claim to be the tomb of Christ, given the lack of evidence, we would need to find Jesus' DNA.
Supposing the body of Jesus had not been placed there, supposing Helena was mistaken, another site turns out to be a good candidate, both in terms of texts and historical probability.
There is in Jerusalem an alternative site for the crucifixion, different from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Gordon's Calvary for me is much more likely and plausible. This site is outside the city, but close to it, where everyone could see the crucified, as described in the Gospel according to John.
Gordon's Calvary is a tomb located in a garden outside the walls of the Old City, just 600 meters from the official tomb. Discovered in 1867, it reopens the investigation on the tomb of Jesus, if one trusts the theory of conservative Protestants and evangelists.
We are in front of the tomb of the resurrection of the resurrected Jesus. Why is this so? Because it corresponds to the Gospels, which tell us the story with a lot of detail. They describe Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified, and say that beside it was a garden where there was a tomb that had never been used.
The scriptures describe a garden next to the crucifixion site. A huge underground cistern found in 1890 next to Gordon's Calvary indicates that this is probably the site of the gardens. Its location outside the city also fits in with the texts. Lastly, 3 crosses, or even more, can be accommodated, which is not the case with the site of the Holy Sepulchre. This theory, however, cannot be confirmed by archaeological analyses.
The problem is that tomb is an Iron Age tomb, 800 BC, 700 BC. And the tomb Jesus is put in was a new tomb that no one had even ever been put in. I don't think historically it works.
Inconsistent dating for Gordon's Calvary and a lack of archaeological evidence prior to the 4th century for the tomb of the Holy Sepulchre. The investigation had hit a wall. Then, in 1980, an extraordinary archaeological discovery shuffles the deck. A funerary chamber from the 1st century was discovered during construction work. A mile and a half south of the old city in the Talpiot district, a funerary chamber from the 1st century was discovered during construction work.
Under this slab of concrete is a stone gate, an arch, and inside that arch is a tomb in which 10 ossuaries were discovered. What makes this tomb unique are the names inscribed on 6 of the 10 ossuaries. The names are Mary, Jesus, son of Joseph, Jose, Mariamene Mara, Matthew, and Judah, son of Joshua. The names are identical to the names of the immediate family of Jesus of Nazareth.
Do these ossuaries contain the bones of Jesus of Nazareth and his family members? The age of the tomb, combined with a matching of names, shook the scientific community.
But what impressed us, and by us I mean researchers, in the year 2000 we began studying this, is the cluster of the names.
That is a very important point because indeed that's what makes this group of names important and so unique. It's the cluster of these names together in the same tomb, not in different tombs scattered all over the place, but within a single cluster, a single grouping of names. The immediate members of the Jesus family are there.
To really understand these names in the Talpiot tomb, what you have to understand are statistics. Let's say we have a stadium with 50,000 people, and we say, all those named Jesus, please stand. So 5% of the 50,000 would stand up. Then you say, how many of you had a mother named Mary? Maybe about half would sit down. And then we say, how many of you had a brother named James? You're gonna have almost everybody sit. You know why? James is a very rare name, less than 1%. And then if that didn't do it, anybody have a brother named Yosei, not Yosef, not Yossi, Yosei, spell with the hey. Anybody? That same guy would keep standing. That would be Jesus.
It is a theory that divides the scientific community. In the crypt of the Jerusalem Bible School are preserved ossuaries dating from the same period as those found in the tomb at Talpiot.
The Jerusalem ossuaries have been studied. 1,200 have been inventoried, and there are perhaps 200 or 300 name engravings. The names are extraordinarily repetitive for the simple reason that it was the old Semitic tradition to give a child a name from his family.
On all 53 ossuaries arranged in this room, some names crop up regularly, such as Salome, Eleazar, or Ikanos.
There are other common names, of course, but there is only one Jesus. However, as there are at least 7 or 8 in Jerusalem, we know that it was a common name.
It isn't really clear why this tomb would be that of Jesus. The combinations are very possible. It has nothing to do with Jesus.
Yes, the concordance is obviously flattering, but epigraphists are much more guarded. They say there are several possible interpretations, depending on the shaft of a letter, and so on and so on. So the end result is highly dubious. It's a nice story, like a fairy tale, but it has no reliable historical consistency.
The last hypothesis is much more prosaic. After the crucifixion, the Romans simply disposed of the body of Jesus, as they usually did with the remains of the executed.
Most likely, after Jesus was taken down from the cross, he ended up in a mass grave, because it was really the worst kind of torture. When Spartacus and his slaves rebelled against Rome, they were put on the cross. So it tells you that crucifixion was for society's very worst criminals.
It therefore seems highly unlikely that the Romans would have allowed Jesus' friends to recover his body after his torture. On the other hand, nobody questions the way he died.
The death of Jesus, and its description in the Gospels, is among the most convincing evidence of his historical existence. If Jesus was an invented character, created by someone to found a new religion, he wouldn't have died in this way. He would have been stoned to death for blasphemy. No text says that he was stoned. He was crucified. All 4 Gospels agree on this at least.
Today, historians are almost unanimous on the subject. The existence of a historical Jesus can be in no doubt. His crucifixion is all too plausible, especially since there is no text questioning the existence of Jesus. Yet, for such a revolutionary figure, if the slightest doubt could have been planted, it would have been. Archaeological discoveries combined with an in-depth study of ancient texts offer us a better understanding of the environment in which Jesus grew up and provides the most plausible interpretation of the events that took place more than 2,000 years ago.
What we call the quest for the historical Jesus is somewhat endless. Our culture, our civilization, has been so nourished by the stories arising from the Gospels, from the figure of Jesus, that it's important to ask ourselves these questions and push back the limits of our ignorance.
Of course, the existence of Jesus raises questions. We must also develop our own perspective on this figure, who is not just a wise man. He's something else entirely. For Christians, he's the embodiment of God on earth. So that's absolutely unique.
While for Christians, the existence of Jesus is self-evident, historians now agree that the presence on earth of a man named Jesus, a descendant of the royal Davidic line, a reformer of Judaism who wanted to re-establish God's sovereignty over Israel, is now difficult to contest.